Hi, everybody. I'm Katie Strand, and I am bringing you our next segment of Bless This Mess. We are on Chapter 8, The Beauty of Bodies, Sex, Drugs, and Going Beyond the Talk. Um, so, this chapter, I think, is a great one. Had some great, uh, pretty general tips for ways to approach conversations about sex, sexuality, gender, bodies with our kids. And I liked this goal that was stated that I kind of pull out of this chapter. That being this, we do this. Sorry, back up. So they talk about how many of us, most of us probably have some work to do on our own sexual histories, the way we were raised, the way we have come to understand sex and sexuality, and that it's worth doing whatever work we have around like shame or past situations or incidents of abuse or just bad experiences. Um, that in order to really be effective teachers for our kids and guides for our kids during they're growing up around sex, we need to do some work to heal our own sexual selves. So here's the goal, though, of all of this is we do this to raise children who understand their own sexual power, autonomy, and dignity, and who intuitively claim sexuality as a positive aspect of their spiritual being and becoming. um, and I like that a lot. We've talked about this in other chapters, especially in the beginning, but that a mature Christian faith is able to see gray areas and everything is not black and white thinking. And they reference that here too, saying the problem of much of current Christian morality is that it follows false binaries of good and bad, yes and no, boy and girl, and that truly, like both science and culture have shown us that sexuality is not a binary thing. It's much more nuanced, it's much more complicated, much more on a spectrum or a scale than it is a black and white thing. And so, what we hope for our kids is that they will treasure their bodies, understand that they were created by God and created good and beautiful just the way they are. That we teach them that caring for our bodies, both in like hygienic ways and in with regards to sexuality, and gender, that caring for our bodies is a spiritual practice and that that is not disconnected from our spiritual selves. Um, they talk about discernment being, this is also a helpful definition, I thought. Like what we're trying to do is empower our kids to be able to discern um, their sexuality and just make decisions about their behavior too. So, discernment is the hard work of figuring out our values and, more to the point, God's desire for us on a case by case basis. So, having the skills and the tools and the value system, the structure in place so that when different situations are encountered, that our kids are able to make decisions and to be able to see what God's desire is for us in on a case by case basis. So not necessarily needing a black and white rule, but being empowered to make decisions in a lifelong way. They define good sex as being sex that is good for everybody involved. Um, so that understanding that there are consequences to sexual activity, there are both emotional, physical, even legal consequences with sexuality, and understanding that an idea of respect and good health is all wrapped into um, what good sex is. Then they talk about some guideposts. I thought this was great, this section, talking about sex with kids. Um, First of all, to understand that when we talk, like what we used to call the talk, is actually much more effective if we consider it a series of many, many, many small talks. that we don't expect to have one conversation with our kids to get everything straightened away, all knowledge imparted, but that it is a practice of many talks. I've heard many parents, especially of older kids, talk about the value of talking in the car, where you don't have to look at each other. Things can come up, you don't have to make eye contact. But anyway, here are some guideposts that I found helpful. First of all, the first one is call it what it is. So, starting when our kids are very young, refer to body parts with anatomically correct language, scientifically correct language. Um, Being able to speak about body parts in respectful ways, but also this is a safety thing, like for kids to be able to name private parts and be able to identify, like if they have, heaven forbid, but experience some kind of abuse or discomfort, like an uncomfortable situation with someone, that they're able to talk about what happened using correct anatomy. Talk about and model consent as part of these talks. And so, talking about our kids letting someone know, letting an adult that they trust know if they're ever uncomfortable or unsafe for any reason, um, that that we can model consent even when it comes to like giving hugs or things that we don't necessarily think of as being sex, but still have to do with our bodies, and consent for or like if someone, it talks about the example of like if you're doing a tickle fight in your family and someone says stop, respect that. Stop and help them know that when they say stop, the person that's engaged with them ought to listen, and ought to listen right away. No means no. Um, Teach kids that sex is fun and it's special. They talk in here about how the fact that God created orgasm means that sex is not just for procreation, it's also for enjoyment and for kind of enhancing and bonding human relationships, and allowing for that physical closeness, that it's a really special gift from God. Again, this isn't the talk, it's an ongoing conversation to go ahead and bring up sexuality with your kids, but also just pay attention and follow their lead as things come up. Be able to answer questions that they're asking, things like that. Um, and maybe even follow up then like the next day or something if you've had a short conversation the day before. The next tip is don't forget about gender. A little bit later in the chapter, they talk about it's around age 3 that gender identity emerges, it begins to emerge. But to talk about your family's values and understanding of gender. But here it talks about we're coming into a new psychological understanding of gender as being fluid. And interestingly, lines up with the scripture that says there is no longer male or female, but we are all one in Christ. So who knows if that's what they were actually talking about back in the day when that was written. But our understanding now is more and more understanding gender to be a fluid, not a binary black and white thing. And also, don't forget to talk about same gendered relationships. So, there's not a ton in scripture about homosexuality, but Jesus didn't, and Jesus talks about all sorts of different things. It says Jesus never mentioned homosexuality, and he was not afraid to talk about sex or money, politics, or any other difficult or intensely personal topic. Um, and says, God made the world and called it good, along with penguins, giraffes, humans, and other creatures that are attracted to or form pair bonds with same gender partners. We are just as God made us. Um, and know that your church, that Shepherd of the Valley, is fully supportive of same sex, same gender relationships. We marry people who are in same gender relationships, and we believe that no matter who someone is attracted to, that God created them to be the way they are, and no matter how someone understands their gender identity, that God created them good and created them to be just as they are. So I don't know if that's helpful. And also knowing too, like if you find yourself entering territory with your own child that feels uncomfortable when it comes to gender identity or same gender relationships, that our pastors are great resources for talking through that and giving support to families in that journey. And as are our youth staff and children's staff. Um, but we definitely believe that you and your children are created as beautiful children of God in God's image, regardless of gender identity or um, sexual orientation. So then we get into some like a couple great. It's too hard for me to summarize and relay, but talking about like well-intended conversations that end up going awry or not the way you intend them to go. And I think the best takeaway from that is that that's all of us, that we think we've got something rehearsed in our head, and especially when it comes to sexuality, but it could be any topic really. um, it's never going to turn out as perfectly or as smoothly as we would like it to. So there were great just great stories about that, like situations like that. But here are some good resources they recommended. I can put these in the comments. One is called Talk to Me First by Deborah Rothman. That was one resource they recommended. And I think that must be for parents. But then this next series of books, I'm thinking might be more for kids to read themselves. It's a series of books. It's Not the Stork, It's So Amazing, and It's Perfectly Normal by Roby Harris and Michael Emberley. And it says that they're geared to age. And I thought this was a great idea. So one of the authors, or maybe both of them, keep their copies of those books in their bathroom. And as it says, our children have read them literally dozens of times, and now their friends like to come to our house to play so they can secretly educate themselves while in the powder room. And I love that idea of having a resource in a convenient place that not only your kids can benefit from, but also your kids' friends and neighbors and things like that. So I thought that was pretty cool. There's also a great section about if your child is queer, they come out to you as gay, bi, trans, or genderqueer. Here is a line that you can use. You can take word for word. You are beautiful and good, just as God made you, and I love you exactly the same as I did 5 minutes ago. There's nothing you could say or do or be that would make me not love you. Simple as that. That is truth right there. And it says a great reference would be to Glennon Doyle's viral blog post that she wrote to her son. It's called A Mountain I'm Willing to Die On, and that's on her monastery blog. Um, but some great tips or phrases, ideas, perspective for us as parents if or when our child comes out. And then it acknowledges too some of the mixed emotions, grieving, all sorts of things that come with having a child that comes out, and all the things that are wrapped up with that both culturally, things about their safety, and perhaps extra struggles that they may go through because of that. But there's great resources here that I'll add into the comments for support in doing that. There's a section on body image that I thought was great. That uh, we do have a lot of influence over our kids' body image. Like, in some ways, I think probably a scary amount of influence. But I think with a good framework around that, it's great that we have so much influence. So one way that we have power over their body image is by the permission and feedback we give them regarding what they choose to wear and eat, how they wear their hair, whether they paint their nails, so on. So, thinking through how much do you want to censor or comment on some of those choices that your kids make? How much choice do you give them, like even starting from a young age? Um, it says eating disorder experts advise zero talk about your child's weight or yours, zero talk of dieting or exercising to lose a few pounds. So focusing on instead on eating healthy and exercising regularly as a way to feel good, to be strong in our bodies, being amazed at what our bodies can do, um, and feeling good about what we all look like, even if um, it doesn't look like a magazine image of beauty or you know, a particular weight that is the target weight for our culture or for advertisements. Um, Talking about how boys are not exempt from this either. So um, let's see. So empowering them and giving them an idea, a good body image, and understanding their bodies as gifts. It says we do this by letting them choose their own clothes, makeup, bodily ornaments, and standards of beauty. Here it talks about alcohol and other drugs. So I guess I didn't maybe explicitly say this earlier, but they talk about how science has shown, studies have shown that abstinence only education, whether it's regarding sex or substances, is not as effective as a more nuanced education. And so it talks about helping kids. This next section is about alcohol and other drugs. So we want to help our kids navigate experimentation years. And they're going to go through those years, whether you maintain tight control around them, you know, while they're living at home, those experimentation years will happen. Um, Whether it's while they're living in their house, your house, or after they are out on their own. But the desire to delay experimentation with substances is important. That helping kids to know that, to begin to understand like the effect on their prefrontal cortex, which is still developing in kids up until age 26. That any experimentation with substances impacts that negatively. So understanding that their bodies are gifts from God, that their bodies are temples, and treating them with respect and with putting good things into their bodies is all important. Um, so talking to kids about drugs and alcohol, but also asking them questions, getting their opinions, like what do you think alcohol does? How do you think it helps or hurts people? Do any of your peers drink? So trying to they talk about the pillars again. If you remember, those three pillars are like the three-legged stool. So trying to get a sense of what's going on in your kids' community or your kids' culture, that would be the involvement leg of the stool. Talk about the choices that they have, that they face, both hypothetical and real. That's the autonomy support leg of the stool. And then the third leg is structure. So be clear about what the likely and less likely consequences of their decisions may be. So using all three of those pillars in talking with your kids about substance use and sex. Um, Doing role plays. We talked about that earlier with other situations as well, but talking with your kids about what to say if their friends offer them drugs or if they're in an uncomfortable situation. Make it clear that you are always willing to come and rescue them from an uncomfortable or dangerous situation. Um, and then talks about if your child does become an addict, and looking for resources like Al-Anon, um, and also, you know, recognizing like how to react and not overreact to different types of experimentation. Then talking about ages and stages, I'll just highlight a couple of things here because this is getting a little long. But with preschoolers, making sure, first of all, priority is to make sure they know the correct terms for their body parts. And to start sharing what your family values are with sex and gender identity, that preschool is not too young to do that. And it even says here, like, this actually was a little surprising to me, but grab a picture book to talk about how sex is the thing people do to make babies, but also sometimes just because they love each other and it feels good. So not necessarily getting into every detail about how sex happens, but use the word sex and talk about body parts. That's really, those are the most important things with preschoolers. With grade schoolers, then focusing on the mechanics of sex, acknowledging that you know, you've invested the time teaching your preschooler the proper names for body parts, and then with grade schoolers it says acknowledge that we all know the incorrect ones, that it's okay. There says chances are they're learning about all the different kinds of balls on the playground. That was a good sentence. Anyway, trying to normalize conversation about sex with your kids, even though they are probably giggly and feeling uncomfortable, acknowledging it's okay that it may be hard for you to talk about, and for even if you have to fake it, fake an air of breezy calm, it says, as an effort to help your kids have like kind of a steady safe place for them to bring their questions, their giggles, their slang words, whatever. But being able to kind of present that calm presence to them. In middle school, they talk about social media. That that's the point where a lot of kids do start accessing social media, and the dangers of pornography. So they talk about twofold dangers, both that pornography presents completely unrealistic picture of sex, but also there are legal risks and legal elements to viewing or sharing pornography that they really need to be aware of, and giving our kids a pause button. So giving them an out so that they know, and also that they know that you could access their phone, any other social media, like any social media accounts they have, that you could and will access them just to screen what's coming in and out of those accounts. And they said, better yet, make a pact with your friends or your kids' friends' parents that you all will be doing this. So even if they receive something from a friend, you're likely to see it, or if they send something or whatever. So kind of being on this together with other parents. With high schoolers, they talk about really focusing on conversation about values and boundaries. And for you and your co-parent to really be on the same page about what boundaries do you expect with your kids. Like, for example, if your teen is dating someone, are they allowed to be at that person's house with a parent, without a parent? Are they able to be there with doors open or doors closed? Like, what are the expectations that you have for your kids? And also to try taking what they call a wondering stance. So using open-ended questions. For example, I've noticed that it seems like a lot of kids in your class are paired off or dating the way they did when I was in high school. I wonder why. And I think you might have to phrase it like that seems a little forced to me, but try not necessarily like peppering them with questions, more of a wondering. I wonder what you think about that, whatever, to try to be able to open up conversation with your high school students. But it says be careful not to overuse it and risk your kids thinking you're a dunce. A 9-year-old boy Ellen worked with early in her career looked up at her one day and said, "You sure do wonder about a lot of things." That was pretty good. So anyway, with that, just I think bottom line is like the most helpful things I took away from this were um, that God created bodies and sex beautiful and good, and that from a faith perspective, that is a valuable thing for us to pass along to our kids. Just this foundational understanding, and that none of that is black or white, black and white. There is a lot of gray area, a lot of fluidity when it comes to gender, sexuality, and it's a process. So don't expect to figure everything out, or impart all wisdom to your kids through one talk, but rather opening up conversation that's ongoing for them. So, as I said, I will try to throw a couple of good links and resources in the comments here for you. I am curious if anyone is watching this and has a desire. There are more in-depth resources available through, there's a couple of programs that are really great as far as empowering parents and equipping parents with um, kind of sex ed tools. And I'm curious as to whether we might want to pursue something like that at Shepherd of the Valley if there is interest in something like that. So you could comment here. You could let me know if that's something that's of interest to you down the road. And if so, if we have a few people who are interested in that, I would love to offer more, either bringing somebody in to help with some conversation, or um, getting some resources of our own and being able to have some more in-depth conversation about sex when it comes to raising our kids from a faithful perspective. Anyway, this is getting way too long. If you made it this far, way to go. I hope you're also like doing the dishes or something, multitasking as you listen. Um, but I also hope that some of this information will help you with talking about sex with your kids. So let's close in a word of prayer. God, when it's time for the next talk, banish shame and embarrassment and help me embody grace, ease, trust in my child, and confidence that you are also guiding them. Amen. All right, next week we have 2 more chapters left. Next week we'll do chapter 9, routines and rituals, how to turn holidays back into holy days. With that, I hope you have a great day.